Greetings, class. In this installment, we're going to be covering the question, how do substance and relationships impact conflicts, which is from pages 21 to page 24 in the Getting to Yes book. As always, I will try to describe the information that they're providing us, as well as adding thoughts of my own. So my answer here is really, it's not a substitute for the reading. But I hope that it's very much in line with the authors are presenting. They give a really good example for conflict. They say to us, think about the person who goes into the room and says, this place is a mess, or why is the sink full of dirty dishes? And we can think about this as being an example about how conflict presents in our lives. Somebody enters the room and they say something. And the truth is, they never enter the room and say, my position is, I deserve better, and I deserve for this to be clean, and clean's important, and when you're not clean, I see it as a sign of disrespect, and I always clean, and you don't, right? Like, it's not all of these announcements. It's never revealing of what, the position is that's being bargained or negotiated. It's never a declaration of what their values or needs are. It's implied. I mean, I think that if we say that you said that the room's a mess, I had no idea what you were talking about, we're probably going to make the person even more frustrated. It's clear that they're declaring something about a desire at the same time as it's not exactly being set up as though it's a negotiation, right? I mean, the person says the room's a mess. Maybe what they want you to hear is, I expect you to clean up before it gets this messy. You haven't met my expectations. But that's not what they actually said, right? But part of what's happening here is you've got the substance, the room, and the mess in the room. And we'll talk more about perceptions in another section that's coming up. But, I mean, it might be more appropriate to say we have the substance of one person perceives the room to be messy. One person could see the room as messy while the other person's like, it's not a mess, or it's not that bad, or this isn't that big of a deal, or I'll get to it later, right? But again, the substance is the room and the condition of the room. And the relationship is, who are the people who are talking to each other about this, and how does that matter? So if we focus on the substance, then the person is probably going to do one of two things, right? Which is kind of dichotomous. Either they will then react to the mess in the room and clean it, or they will avoid it. It doesn't really set itself up for the compromise, collaborate part. Which there might be ways to talk about what the mess needs to be, like how it needs to be addressed. Is the problem the frequency of the room being cleaned, or is the problem the thoroughness of the room being cleaned? Like the thing about it is that what one person sees as clean enough may or may not be clean enough for the other person. What counts as being the mess, what counts as being their priority. Anyway, it can be a negotiation, right? All of these things can be negotiated. And one of the ways that can be negotiated is about the tasks. Another might be the timing. But again, that's the substance. But then the relationship of the individuals is, well, if I hear something like that and then I feel attacked, I feel like you are attacking me, that's about the relationship. And I'm focusing on my feelings of disrespect, or however that's impacting the communication between the individuals. Unless I'm just like, you're right. I mean, the fact of the matter is that frequently messy people, when they get called on it, they're not arguing that the person's out of line for bringing it up. They just might be arguing that, look, I'm really busy. I'm overwhelmed with a lot of stuff. If you want me to do this, like my negotiation for that, like just to be perfectly clear, is I am more than happy to make this room a priority. Which of these other things would you like me to put on hold, or should I not worry about, or something? And that's not necessarily a good negotiation tactic, but so, if I'm just being honest about the declaration of I have a limited amount of time, and anyway, I think you get the picture there. So if the substance is what we're focusing on, then basically we're encountering the conflict or the dispute in a way that who we're dealing with is actually inconsequential, right? That we would handle this the same way no matter who we were talking to, probably with minor variation, right? If it's somebody that you trust versus somebody that you don't trust, then you might have different ways to decide whether or not you need to put it in writing, or what the enforcement clause is, or whatever it might be. If somebody who you have a high level of trust with, and you say, like, let's go ahead and get this in writing, then they might really feel pretty irritated, like, I've never let you down, like, what's the deal this time? While at the same time, if something's really important, it's probably never a bad idea to get it in writing. And there are different ways to make that clear, like as win-win, as opposed to I don't trust you. And then that safeguards the relationship, as opposed to being like sole emphasis on the substance. But so the bigger part here is that there's lots of features of this dynamic of thinking about conflict, which is that when we have more interest in something, then there's predictable dynamics for intensity, and that intensity might increase the duration of the dispute, the escalation of the dispute, right? Like, if something's really important to you, then you might actually be inspired to move past a willingness to shout about what you want and make sure your needs are heard, to getting to the part where you would actually act violently. Or if something's even more important, like that might be the kind of thing that you would kill for, right? Which is the way our mythological narrative of war gets talked about, right? Like, we're willing to kill for our freedoms or something, right? If it's something that you really care about, you will enlist and put your life on the line, right? The idea of sacrifice, and is that it's that important, right? I can't remember who the famous quote comes from, but the three things that man is willing to die for or kill for are his family, his God, and his country. But so the idea there is that the more you care about something, the more you're willing to do for it. And this, I think, holds true for both the substance. If you want something bad enough, then you'll put more effort into pursuing that interest, want, need, the substance. Same is true for relationships. We're willing to put more effort in when these are relationships that are important to us. I mean, it's not just intuitive, but the feature about that dynamic in conflict is that we have a competing kind of principle which relates to return on investment. And if something's important to you, that's great, and it's great to figure that out. But it's also important to figure out where your opportunity costs for meeting an interest, want, or need exceed the value of that interest, want, or need. Right? Like, when people get into disputes and they say it's the principle of the thing, they will sometimes end up spending $10,000 in order to prove a case over, a $1,000 infraction or something, right? And that's a problem in conflict, right? Because it's actually self-defeating. If it costs more to get what you want, then there's not any strategic benefit to continue to pursue that in a way that it costs you more to get the desired outcome than it's actually worth. And that might be something that we can say in some sort of descriptive detail about substance, because our substance might come down to a dollar value. What was the item worth? How much did the repairs cost? It's a lot harder to put a price tag onto the relationship. If your girlfriend breaks up with you, right? Like, if your girlfriend breaks up with you over a dirty room, that's a kind of mistake at a personal level, but it exceeds our ability to put a price tag on what was the value of that relationship. And what's the value of a clean room? I mean, we could talk about what would it cost to hire somebody to clean it, but the dollar amount really might not be clear. Anyway, as we see our interests go up, substance, relationship, we're willing and in some ways authorized to do more in the advancement of that interest. As our interests substantively or in terms of relationship decrease, our limitations to what we're likely to do, well, they're reduced, but in terms of if the relationship's less important to you, then you might be likely to be even more competitive and less accommodating, right? But all these different factors can play into it. And what you're doing versus what the other party's doing might not necessarily have alignment. Anyway, see you on the next one.